Hello everyone, welcome again to video tutorials of LIS 2360 Web App Development with me, Muhammad Prabu Wibowo. In this video, we will still learning JavaScript, but focusing more on Json and Ajax.
In the previous video tutorial, we have covered using JavaScript with HTML, document object model, browser object model, and event-driven programming. We have also covered the interactive exercises. In this video tutorial, we will continue learning JavaScript, focusing on Json and Ajax. Before we practicing Jason and Ajax, I will be explaining first about them. So I have slides with me, so I will explain basics about Jason and Ajax. After that, we can practicing coding Jason and Ajax. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So JSON is actually a method on storing and exchange data. So it's how message or data can be exchanged between the server and the client. It's very lightweight in terms of interchange formats. It is important to note that JSON is a subset of JavaScript, so it's a type of JavaScript, but JSON is language independent and it is self-describing and easy to understand. So JSON data is built into the page variable data, and we can define the JSON data in the page. And JSON looks like data because it contains simple values, so it's very simple and it represents the data itself. It is used for communicating between the servers and clients. So this is the example. As you can see, it uses similar syntax with JavaScript, but it is pretty self-explainable. So in this data, we have, for example, name. We have name, and then we have street or the address and the phone number. JSON is not a document format, and it's also not a markup language, and it's not a general serialization format, and there is no function in JSON. It can be used in any programming language. So the syntax of JSON is more about data, and we can use curly braces to hold objects, and we can use square brackets to hold arrays. And JSON data types can be number, it can be string, it can be boolean, it can be array, it can be object or null. There's a difference between how to store number and string and other types of data in JSON. So for the strings, JSON syntax should be wrapped in double quotes. There should be no separation between character type, and it cannot be quotes, double quotes, or backslash. But if you want to use, for example, quotes, you can use backslash prior to use that specific quotes. This is the example. So for example, I define the variable, and then if I want to use a string, so string should be using double quotes. And the second data in JSON can be numbers. To define numbers in JSON, you just state the value of the number itself. So you can use integer, you can use fraction or floating number, and you can also use exponent. And for Boolean's value can either be true or false. You can also put object for data type in JSON. So objects are usually unordered containers, and it is wrapped in curly braces. You can use comma to separate each key or value, and you can use semicolon to separate keys and values. And keys are usually strings, and values are JSON values can be struct, record, hash table, or object. This is the example of objects in JSON. So I am using curly braces. For example, name, Christy, GPA, followed by the number, enroll true. This is how we store objects in JSON. And arrays are usually ordered sequences. If you want to store arrays in JSON, you can use square bracket, and you can use comma to separate values. So this is the example of arrays. So I can combine objects and arrays. This is the example on how to access the data of arrays. So for example, I have variable of employees. The array contains of 3 objects, 3 people: John Doe, Anna Smith, Peter Jones. So we can use 0 for referencing on the first array of the first name. So the common use of JSON is to read data from a web server and display the data in the web page. Okay, let's discuss about AJAX. AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. AJAX allows web page to load the data without reloading the entire page. So previously, when we want browser to show new data, usually we click on refresh button. But when we are implementing AJAX, we can load the new data without having to click on the refresh button. So how this can be achieved is because AJAX relies on programming language such as JavaScript, and it also relies on data interchange formats such as JSON or XML. AJAX uses XML HTTP request object or XHR object. So it uses HTTP to exchange data between a client computer and the web server. It can be used to request and receive data without having to reload the web page. When we are implementing AJAX, usually we create a request to the server, and then so the process will return the data using JavaScript and update the page content. Okay, now let's practicing how to code JSON and AJAX. You can use any development environment apps that you use. In this tutorial, I will be using AWS Cloud9. Before we start coding, I have several examples on implementing JSON and AJAX. So I have a simple apps with me. It's about movie database connection that runs on JSON and AJAX. This is a small apps that connects the API of OMDB or Open Movie Database that is acquiring any data about movie in IMDb. So this is a very small application. For example, if I want to search specific movie, when I click load, so as you can see, we don't have to reload the page to update any content. This is the example of implementing JSON and AJAX. So I would like to present what is running in the background. So I would like to open the web console and in network. This is what happens behind the scene. So I'm requesting a data and I get response on JSON format. So this is JSON format, title, year, rating, runtime. It happens in real time. So when I click, now I get new JSON that is loaded to the web page. So this is the example of implementing JSON and AJAX. So let's practicing with the first one. As a video tutorial, you can always pause the video when you want to write the codes in your development environment. Okay, for the practice one, we can practice with hello world message. So it's the most basic coding that we can do. So as usual, you can use the basic tags of HTML such as HTML, head, title, so body, and we can use the script. The message is string data because we use double quotes. So when we preview it, so it will create an alert, the data message. So the data in the message is welcome to LIS 2360 web application development. So this is the most basic on coding on JSON. So let's move on to the second example of JSON. In here I have several objects of JSON. I'm creating users data. So each user has first name, last name, and join year. So this one is string data because we use double quotes, and then in the third data, this is a number. This is a numeric data because I didn't use any double quotes, and I'm combining with, because I'm using an ID for the div placeholder, and then I'm using get element by ID placeholder, and then I'm selecting the first user data and showing first name, and then I'm adding a space and the first user last name, and then space, and then I added joined, which is numeric data. So let's preview it. So the result would be Ray, Villalobos 2012. You can pause the video and try to recreate the coding. Let's move on to the third example. So in here I have more complex data. This is called nested data, so data within a data. So for join I have month, day, and year. So I'm using document get elements by ID placeholder because I'm using the ID for placeholder, and then I'm selecting the first data user first name, so I'm using dot first name and then space dot last name and 2 dashes, and I'm selecting the first user of join month. So we can use dot for selecting nested data. Let's preview it. So this is the result. When we want to implement Jason and Ajax, we can use third-party API. So we can use third-party API, and usually when we want to implement third-party API, we need to obtain API key. So you can, and there's a list of website that has API that you can use. So you can use Google Maps, Twitter, YouTube, Flickr. And for this example, I will be using weather API and OMDB API. So here, OMDB API. So for the weather API, I will be implementing OpenWeather API. So to use a third-party API, you need to register for the account. So once you register, you will get an API key. And the API key, so here, this is the example that I will get for applying API in OpenWeather. Once you get an API key, you can use it in your application. So there's steps that you can do to implement OpenWeather Map API. So usually after you get an API, you need to wait your API to be activated. So if your API is not activated, usually it generates error. You can copy the code to your apps. Here's this example of when I'm implementing OpenWeather API to an app. So for example, I'm using a zip codes in Tallahassee. So let's preview it. It's blank, but we can use tools, web developer, network. So this is the JSON of the weather in Tallahassee. So it's clear. This is the location coordinates, longitude and latitude. In the last example, I would like to explain about how to make a movie database connection that I demonstrated before. First, you need to get the API key. So you can go to omdbapi.com. Once you register, you will get an API key. And the website also has documentation on how to use its API, like parameters, search, if you want to search the title. So this is the example. Search, we can get a response on JSON or XML. This is the JSON results. The data inside JSON is self-explainable. So we have title, year, rating. Let's back to the coding. So this is the codes that I implemented in the small movie app database connection. This is the head. I'm using jQuery, and I'm using Bootstrap for CSS and GS. And this is the body. So you can pause the video if you want to write the code in your development environment. This is the container. And the most important is the script itself. I'm creating an input for the movie name and then the button, and I link the button to the script. So once it's clicked, it will using the get type, and then by using the documentation provided by the OMDB, we can use T on title, and you can use your own API key. And once done, we can select the data that we can use. So the data is more complete. We get title, we get year, but for the app, I'm only using several of them. I'm only using the title, rating, actors, plot, and release date. Here again, I'm using title, rating, actors, plot, and release. If it's failed, then it will alert posting failed. So here, if you want to search, so it will, using get method, it will obtain the data. So you can select which data. This is using JSON, so you can select the data that you want to implement to your app. So that's all for this video tutorial on JSON and AJAX. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video tutorial.